Welcome back for part 5 of A Rotten Reads an Essay. This is the evolution and the illusion of randomness. And now we're going to read part 5, Fitness, an irretrievably obscure concept. I did it. If reduced fitness can be on the path towards higher fitness, and if the environment for which the organism is supposed to be fit itself a modifier of the organism's fitness, then to what solid and stable ground do we anchor our idea of fitness? If asked for a definition of fitness, most biologists, especially those who are not philosophically inclined, would probably answer with Carmen Spacinza's, a professor at Temple University Phil's Institute for Cancer Research and Molecular Biology. As she says, at bottom line, fitness is simply the number of offspring provided to the next generation. And on that conviction, there hangs a tale. Along with his antecedent about the wolf, Bethel argues that evolutionary theory based on natural selection, survival of the fittest, is vacuous. It states that first, evolution can be explained by the fact that, on the whole, only the fitter organisms survive and achieve reproductive success. And second, what makes an organism fit is the fact that it survives and successfully reproduces. This is a long-running and much debated claim that natural selection as an explanation of the evolutionary origins of species is tautological. It cannot be falsified because it attempts no real explanation. It tells us the kinds of organisms that survive and reproduce are the kinds of organisms that survive and reproduce. It happens that Bethel was savaged by Stephen Jay Gould in 1976 for making this claim. Gould pointed out that Darwin and his successors hypothesized independent conditions, engineering criteria, as biologists like to say, for the assessment of fitness. These conditions may facilitate and explain reproductive success, but do not merely equate to it. In other words, the concept of fitness need not rely only on the concept of survival or reproductive success. However, the appeal to engineering criteria in the abstract does not by itself get us very far. As philosopher Ronald Brady reminded us when discussing this dispute in an essay entitled Dogma and Doubt, what matters for judging a proposed scientific explanation is not only the specification of non-tautological criteria for testing it, but also our ability to apply the test meaningfully. If we have no practical way to sum up or assess the fitness or adaptive value of the traits of an organism apart from its measurements of survival rates, that's evolutionary success. And on what basis can we use the idea of survival of the fittest or natural selection to explain evolutionary success, as opposed to using it merely as a blank check for freely inventing explanations of the sort commonly derided as just so stories? Some philosophers and evolutionary biologists have long referred with a note of patronizing scorn to anyone who brings up the tautology problem, as if the reference betrays hopeless ignorance of a problem long ago solved. For example, Michael Roos, reviewing a book by Philip Kitcher, could already refer in 1984 to the hoary old chestnut about tautology, and then, in sympathy with Kitcher, dismiss the claim as ridiculous. After all, he writes, could generations of evolutionists really have been deceived into thinking they were doing empirical studies when they spent hours crouching over fruit flies in a lab, or weeks tramping through woods looking for butterflies, snails, and finches? A tautology requires no such study. But what is really ridiculous is to suggest that empirical work, simply by virtue of being empirical work, offers a proper test of any particular theory. Certainly, the work of evolutionary biologists has brought us many wonderful insights into the lives of organisms, insights of this sort that are being gained long before Darwin. But such insights provide a test of the theory that the origin of species can be adequately explained by natural selection of the fittest organisms only if they do, in fact, provide a test. Simply refusing to address the question does no one any good. The dismissive attitude exemplified by Roos continues into our own day. As a response to it, Brady's essay remained relevant and illuminating. But for our purposes, the argument about tautology is of interest not so much as an issue in itself. I build no case on it. But because all the sound and fury that I have been venting over this topic point us towards the obscurity dodging all discussions of fitness, it is no minor problem. You have to have some reasonable notion of fitness if you are trying to explain all the amazingly complex, well-adapted, and diverse life forms on Earth by the fact that nature preferentially selects the fitter organisms to survive. The question, what exactly is being selected, and how does it explain the observed course of evolution, needs to be answered if the theory of evolution by natural selection is to be much of a theory at all. To make the problem worse, evolutionary biologists are driven to arrive at scholar values for fitness, values enabling responsible comparisons of traits and organisms so that they can determine which is the fittest. How do we take all that infinitely wide-ranging and interwoven considerations that might bear on fitness and reduce them to a scholar value? It is a practical impossibility. As a pair of philosophers put it in a 2002 article, suppose a certain species undertook parental care, is resistant to malaria, and is somewhat weak but very quick. How do these fitness factors add up? We have no idea at all. Susan K. Mills and John H. Beatty, major contributors to the most popular theory of fitness, a now rather shop-worn and problematic theory known as propensity theory, acknowledge that since an organism's traits are obviously important in determining its fitness, it is tempting to suggest that fitness be defined independently of survival and reproduction and some function of traits, that is presumably in terms of engineering criteria, noting that such a definition would have the advantage of being non-circular. They go on. However, no one has seriously proposed such a definition, and it is easy to see why. The features of organisms which contribute to the survival and reproductive success are endlessly varied and context dependent. What do the fittest germ, the fittest geranium, and the fittest chimpanzee have in common? It cannot be concretely characterized physical property, given that one and the same physical trait can be helpful in one environment and harmful in another. More than a decade later, Beatty remarked that the precise meaning of fitness has yet to be settled, in spite of the fact, or perhaps because of the fact, that the term is so central to evolutionary thought. This is, if anything, even more empathetically true today. The concept remains troubled, as it has been from the very beginning, with little agreement on how to make it a workable part of evolutionary theory. Indeed, the consensus view, as Roberta L. Milstein and Robert A. Skipper Jr. write in the Cambridge Companion to the Philosophy of Biology, is that biologists and philosophers have yet to provide an adequate interpretation of fitness. And Lewiton, together with University of Missouri philosopher Andre Arieu, expresses the conviction that no concept in evolutionary biology has been more confusing than that of fitness. Yet, the neo-Darwinian theory of natural selection hinges in its status as empirical science upon a reasonable understanding of what fitness means. That's the end of part 5.